you so much. Oh, I started early. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Second Story at Edelweiss Book Fest, day 2. And yesterday we were speaking with our managing editor, Jillian. Today we are speaking with our editorial coordinator, Jordan. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of background. This is Jordan's bio off of our website. So Jordan earned her master's in publishing from the National University of Ireland in Galway in 2018 before moving back home to Toronto. And she's been working in feminist-focused publishing ever since. She joined Second Story last year in 2020, and she does love books of all shapes and sizes, but nothing delights her as much as a good children's book. Her goal in life is to have more dogs, which I think we can all agree is a wonderful goal. But today we are going to focus on the books. Hey, Jordan.
Hi, Bronte. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for agreeing to do this interview / ask an editor. I will say, we called it Ask an Editor for a reason. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat on YouTube, and we're happy to get to them. And otherwise, I have plenty of things that I want to talk to Jordan about. So we did just hear your bio, but I would love to hear how you got into publishing and specifically editing as well.
Sure. So like my bio said, I have been in publishing now for 3 years. And basically, I was coming out of my undergrad and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my career. And like everyone in publishing, of course, I love books and I love reading. And I had no idea how to turn that into a career, but that was sort of my goal. And I'd never really met anyone in publishing. And I guess I just didn't know anything outside of you could be an author. Like, how else do you get involved in publishing if you're not an author?
Right.
So I did a bunch of research and I found this master's program in Ireland, in Galway. And that was sort of like my first step, I guess. And the reason why I did it abroad is if I made the bargain with myself, like if I'm going to go immediately back to school, I'm going to do it out of the country.
Fair enough.
So I can have like an experience, not just school.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I finished my degree, I ended up doing 2 internships. One was the publishing internship with the Brink Literacy Project, which is a pretty cool literacy nonprofit based in the States. And it's remote, so I could do it from anywhere, which was great for me. And I highly recommend. I still actually work with them now. I do a lot of editing for their literary anthology. It's called Friction. It's very cool. So I started as an intern with them and I transitioned to be a junior editor. And now I'm a senior editor with their magazine.
Cool.
And then the other internship I did was actually in London, in England, with Penguin Random House Children's UK. So I got to do like a work placement, which was really cool.
So you did work everywhere but Canada and then ended up working in publishing in Canada.
Yes. So when I ended up coming back, I got my first job in publishing, which was at a feminist academic press, women's press, and it's also Canadian Scholars, which actually our founder has ties with. So that was like Second Story's founder has ties with. So it was pretty cool. So I was the editorial assistant for them for almost a year. And then I moved into a different position at the same company. And then I moved to Second Story where I began as an editorial coordinator. And that's sort of where I've been ever since.
So you didn't really ever consider doing anything other than editorial stuff?
I definitely considered it when I got into publishing, sort of for the same reasons. I wasn't aware of what else there was to do. And editing was like the closest thing to what I was aware of writing. And my undergrad was in creative writing. So that seemed like the obvious thing for me, which I think a lot of people who get into publishing feel that way.
Yeah.
But when I did the publishing internship with Brink, they give you a really good sort of broad overview of publishing from marketing to publicity to rights, all of the stuff that you can do. And the editorial was just really the best fit for my skills and my personality. Editors tend to have a lot in common. So I ended up, that's where my opportunities were. And it ended up being what I was sort of best suited for too. So.
Yeah. Is it different your work now than what you might have imagined coming into a sort of editorial stream in publishing? Or does it hold up?
Parts of it hold up. It definitely has been unexpected in a few different ways. And I think I see it too. Like, I don't know if you have this experience, but now that I have context of working in publishing for a few years, when I see people come up under me, I can see the like disillusionment or the changed expectations happening in real time.
Sure.
Yeah, which is interesting. But I think for me, for the most part, it was, you think you're doing a lot of reading all of the time, which you are, but that's a portion of editorial work. And a portion of editorial work is the creative, collaborative editorial stuff where you're working on manuscripts with authors. Mm-hmm. And then I think almost the majority of other work that you're doing is a lot of technical project management, technical logical stuff like proofreading and copy editing. There's a lot of grant work that goes into being, like, if you're an editor, you do a lot of grant work too. Mm-hmm. I know Jillian mentioned that yesterday.
The spreadsheet queen, I believe she called you. Yes.
I take that crown with so much pride. But yeah, I think it's surprising, I think, how much other work you do in addition to editing, but it's almost, for me at least, a relief. I don't have personally enough creative energy to do a job that's creative like 9 to 5 every day. I like having a break of, you know, when I can use my whole brain, I do a lot of creative work. And then when I'm tired or it's the end of the day, I do a lot of the technical other stuff. That's like more menial and a lot easier to
for sure
make my brain do.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's very interesting. What is your favorite part of your editorial work?
It's a really difficult question because we do so much stuff. And like I was saying, I think my favorite part is that I get to do a bunch of different projects, and every book is sort of different. Yeah. I get fatigued, I think, if I have to do one thing for too long. And if I was reading manuscripts all day, every day, it would be, I think, exhausting. I love reading, but like I need variety as well, and to be challenged in different ways. But I think one of the best things about working in publishing in general is that the types of people who are attracted to working on books are just great people that I tend to get along with really well.
Yeah.
So going to work and being able to work with people who don't mind that you rant about, you know, characters or what an author has done to a relationship that you love or whatever it is, right? Like, they don't want to murder you at the end of that conversation.
Right.
It feels like you've really, like, when I started publishing, I felt like I had found my community in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I feel you there. I think a lot of people, even when, you might start a publishing program as early as that, you realize that, yes, these are the people who you gravitate towards naturally. These are the people that you would love to work with. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. All right. I would love to talk to you kind of taking a step back and looking at publishing as a whole, because as an editor, you know, there's a lot of really important work done by editors to pick and choose what kind of content they think would make sense for their publishing house, but then also, I mean, inherently for the market as a whole. So, you know, publishing is constantly evolving. Jillian and I talked about this yesterday. And are there any particular directions that you have seen the publishing industry take that you think are great? Any directions you hope that it moves in? Any shifts that you've noticed that you're really excited about?
Yeah, I think the biggest conversation, you know, it's been going on for so long in publishing, but the last specifically like 12 to 18 months, there's been a number of very memorable reckoning moments where the lack of diversity in publishing has been really brought to the forefront of people's minds and in conversations. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that seems to be the most important shift that we're seeing people talk about in publishing. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I can only really speak about it from my own experience, but looking back at the opportunities that I've had in publishing, both of my jobs in my first jobs in publishing have been contract work, which is, for me, it's worked out really, really well. But I was in a position where I could take on sort of a riskier job. And I didn't have things like student loans. Like, I was just in a place of privilege where I could make these decisions for myself and take on opportunities that I wanted. But it's like it's an inaccessible industry because there's such little opportunity, and it's not always consistent work. I have friends who have had to turn down jobs that they wanted. They work in publishing, and they had to turn down these jobs just because of other barriers. So I think a huge part of the conversation in publishing is how we can take down the barriers so that the types of people who are getting into publishing aren't all coming from similar backgrounds, and how we can open the door and make the industry a healthier place. So that's a big shift that we're seeing people talk about. And there was that survey that came out. The first one I think was 2015 and the second one was 2019 by Lee and Lowe. And it showcases exactly like what the industry looks like and where people are coming from when they get into the industry. And so that's a really good resource. I think we'll see in the next few years whether these conversations are actually having real change, but it's going to be a slow process. So to say I'm excited about it isn't quite the right word, but it's the thing I'm most interested in. And like, how is publishing going to react to these conversations, and where is the industry moving? It's the most important, I think.
And how do you find that kind of feeds through to your editorial choices, or what you might be looking for in the work that you go through?
If everybody sort of is coming at books and manuscripts from the same perspective, like, just naturally things are going to get left out of the conversation. Things aren't going to get spotted the same way. So as editors, you really have to be careful of what are your blind spots, and what communities are you showcasing, and what communities are you leaving out of the conversation. But I think the most effective way to combat that is to actually just have more people in the room. So it's something, that we have to be aware of, but also we have to figure out how we can open the door from the inside and make it more accessible. It's a conversation, and it's educating yourself and checking yourself. And it's a very complex, larger issue than sort of any one person can speak to. I mean, I can only speak from my own experiences, but it's definitely something we're aware of. It's conversations we're constantly having within the industry, and within the teams that I'm on. So, yeah.
Cool. And you recently became, like, your role has shifted a bit to be focused on picture books, which is so fun. So related to what we were just talking about, are there any particular picture books that you really love that you've seen lately? They could be ours or otherwise, like things that spark your interest, and that then when you're looking at manuscripts, you're kind of like, oh, we could do with more of this. I like the look of this. Like, what really grabs you when you're looking at these books?
I'm going to try to stay away from SSP books. I love them all.
They're all your favorite.
Honestly, I think the types of picture books that Second Story publishes are pretty darn special. I think growing up, I can definitely see a shift in the books that I read as a kid, and the books that we're seeing more and more different types of picture books come out, which is great. Representation is a lot better than it used to be, especially when I was a child. I was looking at some of my favorite picture books from when I was a kid and rereading them, and some of them are no longer my favorites. Some of them have held up and others haven't. I love a lot of Robert Munsch books. Like those, I gravitated a lot to those when I was a kid. The I Have to Go. I don't know if you know that story. It's like a little boy who is potty training, and his parents keep asking him whether or not he needs to go to the bathroom, like before he gets in the car for a long car ride, before they put a snowsuit on. It's really cute. I still love that one. But yeah, the shifts, I think people also are not as worried about or nervous about talking to kids about more difficult and more sensitive issues,
Right.
either historically or in the present moment. And I think that's really important. It's a really important shift in picture book publishing, that we're talking to kids about what these things mean, what they mean right now, what their emotions when they're reading these stories, what does that tell you? How can you talk through these emotions, and how can you talk to kids about these really difficult concepts? Mm-hmm. And I've seen teachers too online, like on my Facebook page, friends of mine who are teachers, talk about using picture books even in like grade 10 classrooms to open the conversation about difficult topics, especially things that are happening in the news sort of all the time. So right. I think they're really important conversation starters. They're a really gentle way to introduce topics and conversations to people of all ages. Mm-hmm. And I think that for me is sort of the most important piece that I'm interested in when it comes to picture books.
Yeah. So representation is one of the big changes that we've seen, you know, since the books that you and I grew up reading. Yeah. Any other changes, good or bad? I mean, do you think that there are just more and more books that are talking about serious sort of subjects now than there used to be?
Definitely more, at least from the books that I read as a kid. But I think it's also like the way that we're talking about issues and the types of authors that are being supported by the publishing industry. Like I know, you know, their families look different now in picture books. They're more representative of what families really look like in the world. And there's not any one type of family. And people are sort of recognizing that and letting kids see themselves in books, letting them see their neighbors in books and their friends in books, which is so important. It's like, it all comes back to that saying, she has to see it to be it. And it's like, that's true for everyone, everywhere. And kids should just be able to see their friends and themselves and their neighbors and everyone they see out in the world in the books that they're reading. I think that's really powerful. And it's like a subtle, important thing that we can all do to help ourselves and each other. Yeah,
for sure. That's so cool. I didn't prep you for this question, but I did talk about it with Jillian yesterday, and the conversation here is just sparking me to think about it more. So obviously, you know, if we're trying to publish more and more diverse picture books and picture books dealing with tough topics, inevitably, you know, you wind up interacting with books that don't that you don't have a personal experience to draw from. So I wonder if you could tell everybody kind of what you guys, the editorial team at Second Story, like what you do when you run into those situations. Like, are there tools that you use, like resources that you pull from, work that gets delegated? Like, how do we handle things like that?
So that's a really good question. It's something it's come up so much because, you know, we're a pretty small team and we want to tackle sort of topics from all over the map, like all across the board. So we just can't be representative of every single important issue that comes up in the types of books that we publish. Something Jillian was saying yesterday about how you just can never assume that you know, and you always have to fact check and you always have to do your research and ask questions. And I think the biggest resource we have as a team is being able to talk to each other. And we're very collaborative at Second Story. And we have a lot of really intelligent, experienced women on our team who have, you know, who really do know what they're talking about. So relying on each other. We also have a huge pool of freelancers that we work with. Matching the right editor to the right book is really important. It's something we think a lot about. We do a lot of research into people that we work with as well, and making sure that the author feels like they have a good support system and resources for them, and the same for editors. So it's definitely a case-by-case basis, and it's just finding within your community the different resources, people that you can talk to about questions that you have, asking a lot of questions, doing your own research, reading a lot of books, not just Second Story books across the board on topics that, you know, you're not familiar with. There's definitely resources out there. A huge part of it is community and your own community. But yeah, I'd say probably just finding places you can ask questions and asking all the questions that you have and making sure you're doing your diligence as an editor.
Right.
It's a huge responsibility and it's a very important part of the job.
It is. I feel, yeah, it is a huge responsibility. I mean, as editors, it seems like Jillian and I were, again, I keep referencing my conversation with Jillian yesterday. It was so interesting. And I love talking to the editorial team. And one of the things that she said was about editing being a two-way street. So, I mean, on that note, is there anything that you feel you really learned from the books that you have worked with and the projects that you've learned that you've worked on, collaborated on? Anything that maybe you didn't expect to learn when you entered the industry?
Editing is absolutely, like Jillian was so spot on. I was watching and I was smiling as she was talking about this. It's such a collaborative process. And I think, I don't know if it's, I think sometimes people think that authors, when they sign away their books, they're like signing away the power over their own projects. And that should never be the case. Editors are there to support the author. They're there to ask questions. The power should always be in the author's hand. Like Jillian said yesterday, the author's name is the one that's on the book. It's their book. It's their project. It's their thing that they've been working on for however long. So an editor, a good analogy I've heard is when an author writes a scene, whenever they're rereading that scene, they bring with it all the thoughts that they had when they were writing and all of the emotions that they wanted to put on the page. And the editor can come in, read that, and then make sure that all the intentions that the author had are on the page. So it's a lot about asking questions and figuring out what the author wanted, and then making sure that, everything that they think is on the page, because it's all, part and parcel for them, it's actually there. And making sure that the story is everything that they want it to be. So, yeah, I think what I've found is oftentimes I'm reading a story and I just have a whole bunch of questions and I point them out to the author, and I can't make any suggestions until I understand what they wanted to begin with.
Right.
And then that's where the collaboration really starts, is once I understand what the author wants, is where the editing really gets fun and collaborative and you work with the author. But yeah, it's a really fun process. It's very creative, and it's not ever about the editor knowing more or better. Right. It's about figuring out what the author wants and how you can help them get there.
Fascinating. Love it. And you read a lot of submissions from the slush pile. So at Second Story, we do accept, what's the unsolicited manuscripts is the right term, right? We accept manuscripts from people without agents. You can just submit. So when you are looking through submissions in the slush pile, what are you looking for? What grabs you when you see, when you're leafing through a picture book? Is there anything that makes you really go, I need to take a second look at this, or maybe I need to pass this on to Jillian and she can have a look at it because I think there's something there? Like, what are those stimulants?
It's like a huge question, because there's never any one book that we're looking for, and we often don't know what we're looking for before we see it. Which is like the cop-out answer, but also true. I think for me, what I think is so special about Second Story books is that they sort of act on so many different levels. So we tend to publish a lot of stories about really strong female characters. We like there to be some sort of social justice intent, or like it has to relate to our social justice mandate. That can be any number of things, but there has to be sort of something motivating it that is in line with our social justice mandate. I'm saying has to, that's not true, but like it tends to be the manuscript that we sort of pick up and take a second look at. We also like really emotionally driven stories. I think particularly for our picture books, there's a really, I think, good example is Stolen Words, which is such an emotional story, and it sort of is driven by a question that a little girl asks, and then seeing and feeling emotions within her family, making a decision, and doing something that's totally within her power, but that has a huge impact. The kid has so much power in that story. And I think that's also another big thing that we really like is not stories that lean into like a didactic way of telling a kid's story, but where the kid has the power and the kid is in the central position of power in the story and really motivates the plot and the story and where the book ends up going. So there's a whole bunch of different things we look at, but typically I find the second story books that we end up publishing sort of do a bunch of these things all together. And the emotional piece, the emotional hook and richness, I think is a big one for us.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, you mentioned earlier that picture books can be used for like an older audience, even up to high school or adult. Like, are there any picture books that you hold dear that you find still speak to you, or even just any sort of topics that you think can be tackled with a picture book for older audiences?
I know when I first read, like, I Am Not a Number, it taught me as an adult a huge amount that I was sort of aware of, but it's different when you are reading stories about really difficult topics that are still completely relevant, obviously, in the news today and what's happening to our communities in Canada, various different communities in Canada. So for me, I think picture books are written for kids and parents, and they tend to be really complex stories. Like, I was talking to our publisher a little while ago, and she said something that's so special about picture books is that they have to do everything that a novel does, but in such a short amount of space, like 750 words or something. Yeah. So, they're not simple books by any means. They tend to be really complex stories that do all the same things, but in like a postage stamp amount of space. So in that way, I think that they are really, many different audiences are receptive to them. They're incredibly complicated, nuanced stories, but they're told in gentle ways, or they're told in like a short scene or short moment that sort of speaks volumes. So I think there's something for everybody when it comes to picture books. Kids are like the harshest critics. So to expect that like they're going to like something and no one else is going to get it just doesn't make sense to me.
That's true. And sometimes, things that do not even make an adult smile have kids in stitches, and vice versa, I suppose, as well. So it's hard to predict how children are going to react to picture books, but when they do, it's with strength of emotion, for sure. Okay, we just have a couple minutes left. We haven't had any questions in the chat yet, but if anyone would like to pop one in, feel free in the last few minutes. And if somebody had a question for you, is there any particular way they can reach you? Just through, a submission? Obviously, we have our submissions page on the website, but aside from that.
Probably easier to reach me at my email at Second Story, which is jordan@secondstorypress.ca. There it is. The submission inbox is sort of so inundated and so busy that if you have a query, put it to my personal email, and I'll see it much easier. Our submission inbox works. We go through every email as they come in order. So to try to keep our wait times down as much as possible. So anything that comes through there goes to the end of the line.
Okay, good to know. And what I would love to close out with is, if somebody has a picture book in their heart and they're thinking of possibly submitting to Second Story, is there any kind of advice that you would give them, anything you would tell them before you submit, or if you're thinking of submitting, here's my kernel of wisdom?
Definitely take a look at our submission guidelines page. There's a huge amount of information, specifically the types of books that we publish, what we're looking for, that kind of thing. Read, if you can, some of our backlist to give you a sense of what we publish. I think Jillian had a great analogy yesterday when she was referring to, publisher has their own brand, their own types of books that they publish, that they support. And it's just, part of the business. So a book that is a great book might not be a great book for Second Story, but
Right.
it would be a great book for a different publishing house. Mm-hmm. So quality over quantity with your submission process for sure is find places that your book will thrive in. And that's sort of your best bet in getting your foot in the door. And it saves you a lot of time more than anybody. Mm-hmm. So that's my biggest piece of recommendation, is do some research. You've spent a lot of time crafting your story, and it's important that, the whole process is important. So make sure you spend as much time finding the best home for it in the end as well.
Finding the right home. Absolutely. Great. Thank you so much for that, Jordan, and for this whole conversation. It's so interesting. I love talking to editors, and I think that everybody who's a book lover loves to hear from editors. It's really endlessly fascinating. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for doing this and interviewing us and asking such insightful questions. This has been great. Thanks so much.
Yay. And thank you, everybody at BookFest. Please feel free to visit our booth again. Take a look. We have ARCs for download, catalogs for download, all sorts of fun stuff. So thank you, everyone, and goodbye.